Imagine a universe where the God of Mischief doesn't fall to shadows, but rises to the golden throne, a crown gleaming on his head and destiny trembling beneath his feet. Loki, not Thor, holding Odin's staff with the weight of 10 realms resting on his cunning shoulders. Would it be salvation, or would it become the birth of something far darker? For years, Loki craved the throne not just for power, but for recognition, for love, for the feeling of finally being seen as more than just a shadow. But power changes people, doesn't it? Even when claimed in the name of justice, it corrupts, twists, and feeds on wounds too old to heal, especially wounds carved by family. Picture Asgard's great hall, not ruled by thunder's might, but by silver-tongued words, illusions, and endless schemes. A kingdom where loyalty is bought with fear instead of earned with honor. Yet here's the question: would Loki truly doom Asgard, or would he prove everyone wrong, showing the world that a mischief-born king could carry destiny better than gods of thunder? Because behind Loki's smirk is pain. Behind his betrayal is longing, and behind his villainy is the desperate child who just wanted Odin to call him son. If Loki became king, the first change would not be war, but silence. His rule marked by whispers, shifting alliances, and a throne surrounded by daggers pointing in every direction. Thor, the rightful heir, would no longer be a brother in arms, but a rival in exile, watching helplessly as his mischievous sibling rewrites the fate of golden Asgard. Imagine the gods debating in shadows, questioning their loyalty, while Loki smiles knowingly, weaving every doubt into a weapon, every secret into leverage, every oath into chains of loyalty. But here's where it gets complicated. Loki isn't just a villain, he's a mirror of humanity itself, flawed, yearning, desperate to matter, willing to burn the world just to be remembered. With Loki as king, alliances with other realms wouldn't be built on honor, but on manipulation. Treaties would be riddles, promises would be traps, and war would always be one lie away. Can you imagine Midgard under Loki's gaze? Earth wouldn't be protected, it would be tamed, charmed, bent, until humanity danced like puppets on strings of silver illusions. The Avengers wouldn't be his allies, no, they'd be his pawns, his bargaining chips. Heroes twisted into players in a game they never even realized they were losing. And yet, strangely, under Loki's rule, peace might actually last longer than war, because fear, when mixed with fascination, keeps kingdoms loyal far longer than love ever does. Odin once said that kings are defined not by what they desire, but by what they sacrifice. But what would Loki ever give up except trust itself? Thor, watching from exile, would struggle with rage, grief, and guilt, because deep down he'd know maybe Loki ruling Asgard was his fault for never seeing the brother beneath the mischief. And what about Frigga, the only one who ever truly believed in him? Would she see a son reborn in power, or a child consumed by the throne's curse?
Loki's reign would not be golden. It would be silver and green, shimmering illusions masking rot beneath. A kingdom thriving on spectacle, but hollow in the shadows where truth always hides. And sooner or later, that hollow silence would fracture. Because when Loki wears the crown, it isn't Asgard that changes, it's the very definition of power, trust, and sacrifice itself. Every kingdom has its crown, but Asgard's is heavier than most. So heavy, it bends kings into tyrants, and tyrants into monsters wearing the illusion of royalty. If Loki sat upon that throne, he wouldn't just rule Asgard, he'd redefine it, twisting legacy into theater, history into mythology, and destiny into a script written entirely by his hand. The Bifrost, once a bridge of wonder and honor, would become a weapon of conquest, a rainbow road stained with the weight of Loki's endless hunger for dominion. And think about the 9 realms, watching nervously, trembling at every decree, because a king who smiles while threatening war is far more terrifying than a warrior who roars before battle. Thor, somewhere in the shadows of Midgard, would feel that sting of helplessness, knowing he could lift Mjolnir 1,000 times, yet still failed to lift his brother's heart. But what makes this story chilling is the thought that Loki might actually succeed. that his cunning could build an empire of stability where thunder and brute force only bred chaos. Because isn't that the paradox? Sometimes villains hold the tools to keep the peace, while heroes, blinded by pride, only ignite wars that were waiting to burn. Imagine Odin's golden vaults, treasures shimmering in silence, each relic whispering power, each weapon waiting, and Loki, alone, staring at them not as artifacts, but as promises of control. Would he wield them for Asgard or hoard them for himself? With Loki, the line between selfish desire and noble intent blurs until even gods cannot tell the difference. His reign would not echo with cheers, but with applause forced by fear. A kingdom where loyalty is tested by silence, and rebellion is drowned before it even breathes. And yet, some part of you wonders, could Loki actually grow into the crown? Could the God of Mischief transform into the king destiny always denied him? Because under the lies, under the schemes, under the cruelty, there's always been a boy left behind, still searching for a place where he belongs without question. Maybe that's why Loki's story hurts so deeply, because in him, we see not just a villain, but the reflection of every broken promise we've ever endured. If he became king, Asgard would glitter brighter than ever, but beneath the sparkle, it would fracture, because lies, no matter how beautiful, eventually collapse under their own weight. Thor would return, of course, not with an army, but with a question. Does a crown earned through fear hold the same worth as one forged in sacrifice? Their clash wouldn't just be brother versus brother. It would be philosophy against philosophy, illusion against truth, and love against a lifetime of resentment carved into shattered family ties. Picture it, lightning tearing across the skies of Asgard, illusions shattering like glass, as Thor's hammer collides with Loki's magic in a storm that could rewrite history itself. And in that storm, Asgard would hold its breath, wondering which legacy would survive, the thunder of might or the whisper of mischief echoing through eternity. But the tragedy is this: no matter who wins, the bond of brotherhood will remain broken, a wound too deep for gods to heal, bleeding across the 9 realms.
Because in the end, Loki ruling Asgard isn't just about power, it's about loss, about the cost of destiny, and about the love that was never enough to save him. Imagine the golden halls filled with echoes of forced loyalty, where every cheer hides fear and every oath whispers betrayal beneath the shadow of Loki's cold and calculating gaze. Asgard would shine brighter on the surface, festivals more extravagant, victories more public, but beneath the gold, cracks of mistrust would spread like roots breaking marble from within. Loki's rule would bring order, yes, but it would be the kind of order written in secrecy, where truth bends and reality itself is crafted like theater. To the 9 realms, he would appear as savior and tyrant simultaneously, a ruler who keeps the peace, but only through fear of the storm waiting behind his smile. And yet, perhaps somewhere in his heart, Loki would believe this was justice, that he was finally giving Asgard the stability denied under Odin's lies and Thor's reckless thunder. But peace built on manipulation is fragile, like glass under pressure, and sooner or later, even illusions shatter, revealing the darkness festering beneath the crown's polished surface. Would the Asgardians rebel? Perhaps. Or perhaps they'd surrender their freedom willingly, seduced by the beauty of Loki's lies, because sometimes fantasy feels safer than the burden of truth. That's the tragedy. Loki knows stories better than anyone, and as king, he wouldn't just rule with power, he'd rule with narrative, scripting destinies like a playwright of gods. Heroes would become villains, villains would become heroes, and history itself would bend until no one remembered what was real, only what Loki allowed them to believe. And in that terrifying thought lies his genius, because the most dangerous ruler isn't the one who wields the sword, but the one who rewrites why the sword was ever needed. Yet even kings cannot silence guilt, and in the quiet of his chambers, Loki would still hear the laughter of Thor, the wisdom of Frigga, the silence of Odin. Those ghosts would haunt him more than any rebellion, reminding him that no crown, no illusion, no throne could ever erase the ache of a brother's lost embrace.
Thor, watching from afar, would carry his own torment, torn between duty to stop Loki and love that whispers, maybe, just maybe, his brother could still be saved. That tension would boil into destiny's inevitable clash, a confrontation not born from hatred, but from heartbreak, where every strike is fueled not by rage, but by sorrow unspoken. Picture the battlefield, Bifrost glowing beneath their feet, lightning sparking across the cosmos, as Thor pleads with the king who no longer listens, because listening means weakness, and weakness means defeat. Loki would fight not just with magic, but with words. Every spell laced with venom, every illusion a reminder that Thor failed to understand him when it mattered most. Their duel wouldn't just shake the skies, it would shake the very foundation of what family means, of what loyalty costs, and of what destiny steals when gods forget love. And in the eyes of Asgardians watching, this wouldn't look like justice or treason, it would look like the unraveling of everything they believed their gods stood for. Because in that moment, Asgard would finally see that sacrifice doesn't always come from noble hearts. It sometimes comes from broken ones, bleeding beneath the weight of impossible choices. And the question that lingers is haunting. What is more dangerous, a god who rules with thunder, or a king who rules with lies so beautiful you never want the truth?
Imagine Thor's hammer crashing against illusions so perfect they feel real. Every strike shattering not enemies, but memories. Childhood laughter, shared battles, and the brotherhood that once defined them both. The clash wouldn't just be steel against sorcery, it would be history against future, love against pride. A storm against a lie dressed as truth, echoing across realms trembling in silence. Loki's words would cut deeper than blades, reminding Thor that Asgard never chose him willingly, that his thunder was fear, and that perhaps the Golden Prince was never a hero. Yet Thor's heart, scarred but unbroken, would still plead through every strike. "Brother, this is not you," his voice cracking like thunder, desperate to break through endless storms. For the first time, Loki's crown would feel heavy, each jewel weighing like judgment, each roar of battle echoing the truth that no throne can silence a heart's fracture. But Loki would fight harder, not because he hated Thor, but because surrender meant admitting the crown was nothing more than a mask to hide his eternal loneliness. As lightning split the skies, their duel would become myth, a spectacle where gods stopped being immortal and instead became two broken sons arguing over love, pain, and destiny. And in those moments, the universe itself would seem to hold its breath, waiting to see if love could triumph over power, or if power would destroy love forever. Picture Loki's magic weaving serpents of green flame, Thor's hammer breaking them apart, every strike louder, every word sharper, until the line between brothers and enemies blurred beyond recognition. The Asgardians watching would whisper in fear, torn between loyalty to a rightful king and devotion to a hero, uncertain who represented salvation and who represented damnation. And perhaps the saddest truth would be this: neither Thor nor Loki was fighting for Asgard. Both were fighting for something far smaller, far greater, the love of a brother. Because in their hearts this battle wasn't about crowns or thrones, it was about betrayal and forgiveness, about two souls bound by blood, yet divided by choices they could never undo. Imagine Loki's face breaking for just a moment, his mask slipping, his eyes whispering the truth, that even gods long to be loved more than they long to rule. But pride is a cruel master, and Loki's pride would not bend easily. It would force him deeper into lies, even as his heart begged him silently to stop. Thor's hammer would tremble in his hands, not from weakness, but from sorrow, because he'd finally realized this wasn't an enemy he could defeat, but a brother he could lose. And maybe in the chaos, Thor would lower his weapon, offering not thunder but mercy, because sometimes the strongest strike isn't one that destroys, but one that forgives.
That pause, that fragile heartbeat of silence could break Loki more than any lightning strike, because forgiveness means love, and love is the one thing Loki has never trusted. Yet mercy is dangerous in war, and as Thor offers peace, Loki might strike harder, not because he wants to win, but because he doesn't know how to lose. And in that storm of magic and thunder, the universe would finally understand. This was never a story of good versus evil, but of two brothers trapped in destiny's cruel design. Because in the end, what destroys gods isn't war or weapons, it's love twisted, pride unyielding, and the unbearable weight of a family that never truly learned how to heal. As the dust settled, silence fell over Asgard, not the silence of peace, but the silence of wounds too deep to heal, echoing in the hearts of gods and mortals.
Loki, standing tall upon the shattered throne, would wear his crown not with triumph, but with trembling hands, because victory without love tastes more bitter than defeat ever could. Thor, broken but unyielding, would look at him not with hatred, but with sorrow, because sometimes the deepest punishment is simply watching someone you love become lost forever. And the people of Asgard would kneel not from loyalty, but from fear, their voices trembling as they whispered the name of a king they never truly chose. Yet deep down, even Loki would know. Fear builds empires quickly, but it crumbles them even faster, because no crown forged in fear has ever survived the test of time. Imagine him in the quiet of night, sitting alone upon Odin's throne, the golden halls echoing not with applause, but with the ghosts of laughter he can never reclaim. Because every crown carries a curse, and Loki's curse was this: he had won everything he ever wanted, only to realize it was nothing without the love he craved. Thor would leave him then, not in rage, but in grief, walking away with heavy steps, because sometimes the bravest choice is to let a brother face himself. And in that emptiness, the All-Father's words would haunt him, reminding Loki that a throne is not a prize, but a burden, one that devours those unprepared for its weight. Perhaps Loki would hold the 9 realms together for a time, weaving his lies into fragile peace, but peace built on illusion is nothing more than glass waiting to shatter. The multiverse would watch silently, knowing that a single crack could tear open chaos, because when a trickster holds the crown, destiny itself begins to tremble at the seams. Yet here lies the tragedy. Loki never wanted to destroy the world, he only wanted to be seen, to be loved, to matter in a family that forgot his worth. And isn't that the most human thing of all? A god chasing love, failing, breaking, but still searching for the one thing even eternity cannot guarantee: acceptance. Perhaps in another universe, Thor would stay, Loki would change, and Asgard would find harmony. But this universe, this story, was carved in pain, pride, and promises unfulfilled. Still, even in ruin, Loki's reign would become legend. Songs of a king who ruled with brilliance and cruelty, with beauty and terror, forever remembered as both savior and betrayer. And though history may curse his name, children would whisper his tales in awe, because villains are remembered just as deeply as heroes, and sometimes even more. Thor, carrying scars deeper than any blade, would wander realms searching for hope, his heart heavy with the truth that he could never save the brother he loved most. And Loki, the king of lies, would stare into the stars each night, wondering if somewhere, in some other timeline, he was more than a crown, more than a curse. Because at its core, this was never a story about thrones or kingdoms. It was a story about family, about love twisted, and the unhealed wounds between two broken sons. And isn't that the most human thing of all? A god chasing love, failing, breaking, but still searching for the one thing even eternity cannot guarantee: acceptance.
Perhaps in another universe, Thor would stay, Loki would change, and Asgard would find harmony. But this universe, this story, was carved in pain, pride, and promises unfulfilled.